The founding of Baiemont and the construction of a new highway between it and Costanoa has attracted a lot of interest from investors. On the one hand, Amélie Dubois knows that Baiemont will need new jobs to support its citizens. However, she wants to preserve as much of the natural beauty that the area has to offer as well. On the other hand, business interests in downtown Costanoa see the unincorporated land between the two cities as an opportunity to expand the local industry and invest early in developable land. In today's episode, we'll be working on placing down these key job centers, building the infrastructure and services that Baiemont needs, and finally getting started on zoning in Baiemont. The first thing I'll do is I'm going to start with another comment that was left by JLA, and the first half of the reason that I want to address this comment is that, for one, I also looked at one of their comments last episode and completely mispronounced their name, so just wanted to readdress that and say thank you, JLA, for both of those comments and also all the comments you've been leaving, and thank you to anyone else who's leaving comments and feedback. The second reason I wanted to look into it is because it spurred a couple ideas. So the comment is about the service trade in Costanoa and why it's positive. So if we take a look at that, the service trade right here is at 1789, and then we can check over at services and actually see that the electricity is obviously, we're not exporting any there, and we're actually importing quite a bit, but it's the water and sewage that we're getting the export from, and it's that same number, 1789. Yeah, it looks like if you hover over this, you can actually see what's causing that. So exported water down on the bottom right there. But that whole process did get me thinking, the service trade that we have for specifically electricity at 73,000 in the red is something that I want to address, and the founding of this new city is a good time to do that. So I mentioned that Amélie Dubois wants to maintain some of the natural beauty of the area, and I'm going to try to stick to that as best as I can. And one way that I'll do that is that I'm going to use a particular form of electricity generation that will, in theory, detract from, I guess, the natural beauty in aesthetic terms, but it's not nearly as destructive as other forms of energy. So that's going to be these wind turbines. The place that I want to place those is going to be over in this area right here. And if we take a look, we can see that there's a kind of a flat area right here. And I want to do two things with this area. So the first, like I mentioned, is add in some wind turbines right here, and the electricity production from that is going to be 5 megawatts pretty much no matter where we place it, so we'll have some freedom in terms of where that is going to be placed. The other thing I want to do is, if we take a look at our specialized industry, is there's a lot of fertile land here and it's relatively flat, so what I want to do is I want to add in some additional farms here as well and kind of integrate those two uses together. The idea is that the people who will be farming here will be partaking in some form of profit sharing with that energy production by having those wind turbines on their land here on the farms. As with any new area, one of the things that I want to look at is the topography and kind of get a sense of where I want the roadway layout to go in the future. So if I take a look here, you can see that like this land really conducive to being just gridded as it normally would be. This is going to be farmland, so there really won't be any sort of grid going on, but that's just something that I'm noticing. And then over here, there's some flat land as well, and I'll probably make another connection in somewhere here, probably without a roundabout, because I don't expect it to be getting a lot of traffic right now. And in reality, it would be slightly cheaper to just build a straight up connection as opposed to having a roundabout. So I'll stick with that. The other thing is I'll come out of this roundabout and I'll bring a road up this way, and I'm probably going to end it somewhere around this area right here. The idea being that it'll continue off this way somewhere, and it'll probably then just meander up this hill so that the grade is not too extreme and go off this way somewhere. That will be a future thing, but for now I just want to have that road in place, and I'll terminate it somewhere around here. I think I want to preserve some of the land on this side for some of the basic electricity infrastructure, like the transformer station, which is going to be needed in Baiemont. But generally that doesn't take up too much land, so I'm not too concerned about that. There should be plenty of flat land to be doing that over in this area right here. And I think I'm happy with the way that this looks. What I want to check is the amount of electricity production that I'll actually need right now. And it looks like we are off by about 6 megawatts. So in theory, I think 2 of these wind turbines would suffice. Of course, there's gonna be some level of fluctuation of the production of these wind turbines based on just how windy it is. The other thing I want to consider is that we're going to be building out Baiemont, so the amount of electricity we'll need is going to be significantly higher than what we have now. So we'll probably need closer to 40 in total. I won't build out to 40, but what I'm going to do is probably build, I think, 4 total wind turbines, and that'll at least allow us to produce enough electricity for now. So I don't know too much about the placement of wind turbines and what's optimal, but I get a sense that probably placing them too close to the base of a hill is not great, just because the hill itself might be disrupting some of that wind. So there's probably some benefit to being a little bit elevated, but since it's a tower, it's not that important, I would imagine. So I want to come probably a little bit off of this base for this one. The other thing I know is that I don't want to be placing them like all in a row. Like right here would be a bad place to have another wind turbine because of the wind direction. This wind turbine would disrupt some of the wind that's coming towards this one. So as far as like this area right here, I'll probably just leave that one, and then I'll place at least one right here. And I think I want them to be just a bit off the road, not too close, but not too far. So right there should do. And then probably another one somewhere in this area. The thing is, this is kind of encroaching pretty close to this hill, which I think would disrupt a lot of the wind. So it might be better to place that somewhere else. I think even probably back here is a lot better. And I think just because I don't want to be too much of a stickler, I'll go ahead and place one more right around here. I want to make sure I'm looking at these from the road as well to kind of see what things look like. So if you're coming in, let's say you're coming in from Costanoa this way, on this road right here, they are pretty large, but definitely not as obstructive in terms of views as these giant power lines are. So it's really not much worse than that. They are pretty clustered here, I would say, but I'm not necessarily prioritizing the view that way from Baiemont either. So if you're kind of down here, you would see these structures right here, but really the important view is out that way. So I don't think I'm all that concerned about those being there, but it is something to consider having these large structures out in the field here, that they do obstruct view some, and they're, I wouldn't say total eyesores, but they don't look as pretty as the natural environment does with these hills. And I made mention of these large power lines here. One of the reasons I wanted to have this facility right here is that I wanted to back off a lot of these power lines all the way back to here, so that they're not quite as close to Baiemont and they're not quite as obstructive to those views. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we can take a quick look back at how it looks like with that out of the way. So we come back in here. Yeah, I would say that looks considerably better just without those power lines. So that was a big change I wanted to make. They still do look very strange on the hill there, but not nearly as bad right here. Now I want to make sure I do have that transformer station in place, and if we just get a sense of the size, it's not too big. And I think that I want this to come off of one of these roads here, be somewhat close to this, but not too close. So I think it makes sense to have this pretty close to the highway, and it doesn't need much more than just an alley, I think. You know, I don't think it needs its own dedicated road now that I'm thinking about it. I think it's, first of all, just much easier to put it like this. And second of all, there's not going to be a whole lot of action going on here. There's not going to be a whole lot of vehicles going into that area. So it's not going to be a huge traffic burden or anything. It also makes the connection with these high voltage lines quite a bit easier too. So that's helpful. The other thing I'm now going to want to do is I want to make sure I'm connecting up these wind turbines, and I want to give them road access. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of pick a place to come out of. I think, oh yeah, it looks like just having a straight line is good enough in this case. But yeah, I'll figure this out for each of these spots. And with that connection, it also connects up the electricity lines. I wanted to make sure too that I was producing something that actually needed to be produced, or at least that didn't have a huge surplus already. And it looks like that is probably going to be the textiles. So I'll place a little bit of that in here. I might place also a livestock farm, and then one of the either wheat or the vegetables. And that's the extent that I want to build out this particular area. I think you could make an argument that I kind of overdid it on a lot of these trees, but I do like the way it ended up. So what I did is I used these spruce trees along the main roads, and that's just kind of to shield a little bit visually, but also just a windbreak. And then on the interior, I used some of the birch trees just to give it a little bit of a visual distinction. The rest of this land here, I'm just going to leave open for now. That's some place that can be developed differently in the future. There's this space here. It can also be used for some sort of service facility or something of that nature. What I'd like to do now is get a start on zoning out Baiemont. And the reason I want to get started on this now is that I think it makes sense to have this zoning be done in stages, just because it's a big area that I'll be zoning and it's going to sap up a lot of the demand initially. So what I'll do is I'll build a little bit and then hopefully the demand will rebound. It'll build a little bit more. And by the end of the episode, I should have most of this, if not all of it, zoned out. Before I do any of that, though, I do want to go over my initial plan for how Baiemont will be zoned. Up on the screen now should be my plan that I've drawn out in Procreate. And what you'll see is that there's this big purple zone in the middle that I've drawn. And that is going to be some French zoning. And it's going to be all sorts of uses, residential, commercial, and office. And the driving factor for using this French zoning is the fact that Amélie Dubois has French heritage and she wants to bring a little slice of France into Baiemont. You'll also notice that I added a few pedestrian roads in my plan that I want to add in as well into my final build. The reason for adding those in is it just makes a little bit of extra use of those areas without having to adjust the grid that's already there. By adding those little squares in, I can make use of some of that land, but still have the overall shape of the grid intact. The rest of the zoning is pretty self-explanatory. I won't go into too much detail, but there are some flexible areas that I've left open with those question marks in them. And I think some of that will definitely turn into park space or something of that nature. But there's also another thing I'm thinking about, which is like possibly an office space or something larger in some of those larger spaces, even some sort of service buildings. So the place that I'm going to get started is I'm going to zoom into this pedestrian area and I want to add in those pedestrian roads right over here. And I'm actually going to use some of these new roads, which are the pedestrian streets, small pedestrian streets. And these are one way in the sense that vehicles can only travel one way. And those are like service and delivery vehicles, like it says. But for pedestrians, it should be multi-directional. So what I want to do there is I think I'm going to use this right here as my anchor point. So first, what I'll do is I'll come up from here and I want to measure out about how far that is. It's 80 meters. So I'll do the same on this side. 80 meters is going to be right there, but I'll go in the opposite direction here. And then right here, I think I'll just go probably about right there. And the reason for this distance is that I'm leaving 2 cell gaps right here so that I could place, if I wanted to, those pocket parks. You should be able to see my idea of having these be squares right here. The French zoning will play nicely with that, so I'll be able to actually put in some French buildings right here and maximize that zone right there. I'll do the same on the other side as well. And the nice thing with these pedestrian paths is you can make these really odd junctions, and it should behave fine, considering that the vehicle traffic here is going to be very limited. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to zone this pedestrian area right here, and I'm going to let everything zone in, and I'll probably make some changes, but the reason I'm doing this first is that I just don't know exactly how big these French buildings are going to be, so I'm just going to kind of mass zone this, see what comes in, and then make selections later on what will go there. I also want to make sure that because my demand meters are going to go down as soon as I do this, that I'm starting with this area initially. and everything's zoned in here, but you can see that the demand for medium density residential is just tanking, and then already the office demand is all the way down. So I didn't add any more offices, but this residential demand is probably not going to come back for a while. So that's what I was talking about. Like, I wanted to get started on this now just because I think eventually that will rebound, but for now, it won't make sense to zone any more of this just because nothing will build in. So I'm going to let this sit for a while, and then I'll come back later and see how everything looks. So now from Baiemont, I want to go along this highway, and somewhere in between here is going to be where the other industry is. And one of those industrial centers is going to be the forestry, and then another one is going to be stone mining. So forestry can kind of go anywhere over here. Stone mining obviously can go anywhere as well. I'd like to put it probably next to a hill, and I'll show you the place that I'm going to actually be putting both of these, and it is right here. The reason for that is, one, it's pretty flat right here, and I think that's going to be helpful for having the forestry industry right in this area. The other reason is that there's this hill right here, so I think the stone mining could be placed right in here somewhere. And while there's probably no synergy between these two industries necessarily in the game, I think it makes sense to have some sort of concentration of these two industries next to each other. I also like this particular area because it is kind of halfway between Baiemont and Costanoa, so in theory, like, people from either city could come and work here. There's also the downside that it's kind of equally far from both of those places, so it doesn't really optimize for either one. That said, the land here should be pretty inexpensive because there is really nothing developed out here. So all of those factors are kind of going into my decision to putting these industries here. So what I'll do first is I'm going to start on the forestry industry, and what I want to do is I'm actually going to, because you can't see the contour lines when you are doing the specialized industry tool, what I'll do is I'm going to map out those contour lines with a path, and then I'll use that path as my boundary for the forestry industry. And this is the path I've laid out, just a bit of an explanation. What I was doing is I was just sloping up this hill gradually, coming around this flat area, doing the same on this hill right here, not going too high, and then just kind of coming on over here. And I think within this area is plenty of space for that forestry industry. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to place a forestry industry, but I'm also going to replace pretty much all of the trees here, or at least most of the trees here, and make rows of trees so that it kind of stands out a little bit from the rest of the forest around it. So I am going to have to get power to this area, and I mentioned this in the last episode of it's possible that I could just add in some lights on this highway and that'll bring power to this area. I didn't do it in the last episode because Baiemont was just starting out as a city and I didn't think it was worth the cost of doing that. Obviously in this game the cost is so low it doesn't matter, but I was trying to think realistically about it. But now since there's going to be some development here, I think it makes sense to just at least this one portion of the highway to add in some lights. It's also just going to help me to get that electricity there as well. What I've done now is I've added in 2 extra paths just to confine myself within this area for my forestry industry. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to place in some spruce trees in here, and then I'll check what the surrounding trees are and I'll pepper in some of those as well, just to blend it a little bit into the surrounding forest. And boy, did this take me a while, but I am super satisfied with the result of this logging area. If we zoom out, you can see its place in the rest of Costanoa County. But yeah, I spent a lot of time detailing this. Thank God for the vanilla tool for creating lines with trees. Still, it took me quite a while. I varied up the age of the trees throughout here, just because I think in an actual logging area, you'd probably have quadrants of trees, and then you'd fell those trees according to their age, etc. I don't know exactly how it works, but it seems to make sense in my head. The other thing I looked into was tree spacing, and I went with 12 meters, but I think you probably could get away with even less. I think it was like about 20 to 30 feet for larger trees. These spruce trees are pretty large. I probably could have gotten away with 10, but I tried 10 meters and it just looked way too dense. So I was pretty happy with this 12-meter spacing that I have. The other thing I found while I was researching logging areas is that they sometimes have these like wildlife corridors or wildlife areas, so that the entire area is not just completely lacking in biodiversity. So what I did is I kind of made these like highways throughout the area that you could think of as like wildlife highways. So the area can still harbor some sort of life beyond just these trees, and it integrates a little bit better with the surrounding hickory and birch forest. But yeah, despite how long it took, I am super happy with this result, and I think it will further down the line just look really cool once things build out around here. But for now, yeah, I'm gonna leave that, and then what I'll work on next is actually gonna be the services in Baiemont, because while I was building that, I kind of thought about it. Yeah, there's no services here. So like, there's services in Costanoa, but they're only serving Costanoa. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to start placing down services now. And if I take a look back at my original plan, I had set aside kind of this area right here for some services. And I think having the medical clinic right in here makes sense, just because it's kind of a highly trafficked area in terms of both like walkability and cars. So it's easy for both those forms of transit to get here. It also might be helpful to have it a little bit more centralized. And if there even is, yeah, there is a French medical center. I think that would actually, we can kind of zoom in and take a look. It's hard to see, but yeah, it looks like it does have architecture that's conducive to just kind of blending in with the other French building styles. So I am just gonna kind of place that, not completely randomly. Let me look at the topography a little bit better. Yeah, I'll probably place it right here just because there's great topography for it. And it's not on our main drag either. And actually, I'll go over to Hemlock Street because Willow Street is kind of a main thoroughfare. So I'll go over to Hemlock Street and put it there. And right off the bat, what I'll do is I'm going to select Baiemont as the operating district. The other thing I would like to do is I would like to extend Baiemont to include the farming area over here. The other thing I quickly wanted to do on the district front is I want to create a district right here, which is going to include this forestry industry as well as the future mining industry right here. So I'll kind of make that a little bit oversized. And this is going to be, I'll show you the name in a second. I've just simply named it unincorporated area. And what an unincorporated area is that it is not governed at the city level, but rather it's governed at the county level. So it doesn't fall under any specific city's jurisdiction right here, but it does fall under the county. So what I'm going to do to kind of formalize that is I'm going to select both of our medical facilities in each of our cities and have them operate on this unincorporated area as well. So that way the responsibility is split between all of them. What I'd like to do in the future is probably have a hospital somewhere that can serve these unincorporated areas. So larger facilities should really be servicing the unincorporated areas, in my opinion. Now what I'll have to do is I'll first go in here into Costanoa and do the rest for all the other services. And then I'll come back over to Baiemont and I'm gonna finish off with the rest of the services that this area needs. So that's gonna be fire and police at a minimum. I think it should already be covered by garbage management because that's a regional facility, but we may want to consider that as well just because this is so far away from our garbage facility. And this is the first area I'm going to deviate a little bit from my initial plan, is on the fire. And the reason I want to deviate a bit is because this farming area is right here, and I think it makes sense to have the fire services a little bit closer to this area, especially with the infrastructure in place here as well. So I was initially thinking, okay, I'll put this over here in my service area, but what I'd rather do is actually probably place that right in this area. I don't necessarily want to have it on Concord Street. So what I might do is place it right here. And I think I'll probably use this French fire station. The other option I have is this German one, but I'll stick with the French theme for now. And I think I'm going to put that right there just to make use of a bit of that land on the corner here. And then for the police, I think I do actually want to place that in this service area that I designated earlier. The reason for placing that here is really that the police will best serve this downtown area just because there's going to be a lot of action here, a lot of people. So I think it makes sense to have that nearby this area. It also is not as important to have that near our farming over here, even though there is a crime scene. I think like it's not as necessary as the fire. So I kind of went back and forth on exactly where I wanted to place this, but I decided on this corner here. And the reason I went for the corner is just that the building looks really nice and it has this four-sided architecture. So I think it looks really great on a corner. I would have liked to have maybe a bit of commercial right here, but I think this whole area right here is going to contain a lot of commercial areas. So it's not a huge deal that I don't have it on this particular corner. I'm noticing too that there is more demand for commercial areas than there is for especially this medium density, which is what's going to kind of fill out this area right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, according to my plan, place down some additional commercial focused areas. And then I'll possibly work as well on some of these like lower density residential areas on the edges here. And this is probably going to be a much longer process than I initially thought, just because our demand is kind of all over the place. I think what I may need to do is actually add a bit of high density, and where that would happen is definitely in downtown Costanoa here. I wouldn't add the high density in Baiemont since it was just founded. The place I think I would do that is actually like right here where these row homes are, as I'd probably replace these ones right here. So I think I will go ahead and do that. So what I'm gonna do is take out these ones right here. There's an additional benefit that there's a lot of transit in this area. What I'm gonna do is I'll probably place one of these UK high density buildings. And let's see what comes in first before I make the final decision there. So probably one there. And I'm also tempted to try a North American one. We'll see what pops in right there. And I think this is kind of what I was worried about. If we take a look, that building is quite significantly taller, about maybe not quite twice as tall as any other building, but it is close to twice as tall as any other building. I do really like the way the building looks in general, but I think it's a bit taller than what I'd want. Let me just get some other views of it. Yeah, I think it doesn't quite fit in yet. So I'm going to go back on that one. And it looks like that EU high density building is also going to be way too big. So let me try again. This one might be more what I'm going for. I'll wait and see though once it builds up. And in terms of scale, that is definitely more what I was going for. And I think it leaves enough space between these two buildings that I'm not too concerned about how close they are. It is like definitely not great if you're living in one of these like corners right here or one of these areas right here, but it is still good. Like you do have a window. It's not the worst. You can kind of see out this way a little bit. So I'm definitely okay with that. And I do like how there's this space in between right here. So I'm going to stick with that one. I think it looks really cool. Looks good. Definitely fits the scale of this part of the city. You can see too that our low density residential did rebound a bit. The other thing that I may have to address is the ongoing demand for industrial. One thing I can do about that is I can place down the stone mining area that I want to put right here. It'll help a little bit, but probably not even that much. I'm probably going to have to place another dedicated industrial area, kind of like I've done in these areas here. And while I'm zoomed out here, I'm seeing this is an issue, crime scene. But I think it should be, it is part of Costanoa, it's just far away, so I think that's the only issue there. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get started on this stone mining area. It should be pretty simple, nothing too crazy going on here, I'd imagine. Nothing too complicated here. I did end up going with ore mining instead of stone mining, just because if we check out the natural resources, there is plenty of resources under here for ore mining. Potentially also coal mining. I know there's a big deficit that I have for coal mining because of the coal power plant over here. At some point, I do want to replace that with a different type of power plant, so I don't know if I'll put in coal mining at all, but definitely something I'm considering since we're at a pretty large deficit in terms of import and export for coal. The one service that I actually forgot, and I can tell now, is the death care. So I'm gonna go ahead and place something in for that. And I think I'll just continue on the French theme. The other option is this UK parish church. So I ended up sticking with that French theme, and I stuck it on the corner right there. And I think I check out the other sides. Yeah, so the other sides are going to probably butt up against some sort of like French zoning like is over here. The last thing I'll do right here then is just select the operating districts, and I'll do what I've been doing and just select both Baiemont and the unincorporated area. So unfortunately, I had an issue where my audio cut out for the end of this recording, but I'll just give a quick explanation of what I did. So the first thing I did is I went back and looked at the plan that I had, and there are some spaces that I left for surface parking. And then I also wanted to add in one of the newer covered parking garages. It's that smaller one that came in a recent patch. I tried to add these at the outskirts of our pedestrian area, and the thinking is that people can drive in from outside of Baiemont and then they'll park there and walk into the pedestrian area. And another reason I want it to be kind of outside of the pedestrian area is to preserve as much of the land as possible in the center of it for pedestrian uses, essentially. The other thing I did is I took a look at our education needs, and the biggest of the two that I have now, which are just elementary and high school, is going to be the elementary school. So I added in a French elementary school in the center of the city, and that's just to kind of blend in with the future French zoning that will go there. The other thing that this kind of brought into my mind is that I think at some point, maybe even in the next episode, I do want to add in a college, and there's a good spot in Baiemont kind of near the highway where a college could go in. And I think that might also help with some of the other issues that we're having with the demand, in that we don't have a lot of highly educated citizens, but we do have jobs that require educated citizens. So having a college in town will mean that we'll have more citizens that fit that criteria, and then we can fill more of those jobs. But that is going to be it for this episode. As a quick recap, what I did today is I added in some key job centers around Baiemont and kind of near Costanoa as well, with that farm, the ore mining, and the forestry industry. I also added in some of the key services that Baiemont will need going forward. The biggest one of those is probably the electricity generation via the wind turbines, but I also added in the other necessary services in the area. And then lastly, I got a start on the zoning. I got as far as I could reasonably get with the amount of demand that we have. I think that'll be a bit of a slower project, and it will just have to work with the demand that we have. But I am pretty happy with the way things are starting in Baiemont and the surrounding area. So with that, I want to thank anyone who has made it this far, and thank everyone who has been leaving feedback. But that'll do it for this one, and I will see you in the next one.